We got some fresh rejections, everybody. I'm sure I talk about this enough, but we over the past few days I got some fresher ones that came in. At this point, like I said, it's something I kind of almost in a way kind of laugh about, just because if you don't, it gets to you, right? You have to kind of make light of it a little bit. But yes, got several. I wouldn't say several, but I got a few rejections that came in recently. These were all for the stories that I've been working on, that I've been submitting, and yeah, they've been getting rejected. So, man, it's rough. I'm quite certain the common denominator in a lot of these rejections is the content of the stories. And the reason why I'm saying that is the one story that I submitted, which is still in all the lit mags that I've submitted it to, still have it in some form of the review process, or haven't gotten it to it yet. But there's been no rejections yet for it. It's all been in kind of the review stage when I've submitted them. So if you go and submit them all, they all say like in review. I suspect that story in particular has not been rejected yet, and the other ones have, for a very kind of simple reason, which is it's the one story where out of context, you won't know the nature of the story. In other words, I guess that's a bit of a weird way of saying it, but what I'm saying is, out of context, you would not know that story is about a town dealing with the tragedy of a mass shooting, right? The other stories that I've penned, what have I sent off? I think 3, something like that, 2 or 3. Those ones very clearly deal with the grief and kind of overcoming it from the individuals that were connected to the event. In one case, one of the stories is about the parent of the shooter themselves. And so those stories are very, very close to the actual event. And the nature of it, the touchy nature, the way I approach the story, what have you, it's a bit... I get it. It's a bit of obviously just a controversial subject, but there's definitely a layer of like, it's a layer of do we want to touch the subject? Do we want to get into it? I have a way of writing stories, and again, I'd love for these to get published so people can understand my style, but I tend to write stories in a way where I find the humanity in some of the weirdest examples, or some of the more offbeat aspects of things like these tragic events that I'm talking about here. It's not, I don't approach it directly. These stories are not really approached in a very direct, sort of manner. It's done in a very different way, which I think is unique. I think it makes it something that's not quite as cliched as the stuff you might have seen before, read about before. I feel like it's a fresh take, but it's different. It's different. It's not the prose itself. The prose is fine, but the way, the angle that I approach these stories at is different from what you might expect, and it's a controversial topic. And I think that's what's killing it. And so the one story that's still out right now, that's still being reviewed by at least a couple of these lit mags, is one where out of context you would not know it was about a town that dealt with a mass shooting. There's a reference to a funeral, but that is it. The rest of the story is actually about a young child who comes to his, who's, I think, third grade, so 9 years old, about a 9-year-old child who goes with his mother back to his mother's hometown because his mother has to come back for the funeral of a friend. Their friend's son had passed away in the shooting, and so the mother comes back for the funeral, and her child gets to hang out with her family, and the child basically is meeting his maternal family for the first time. He's not had them before, and they're very different from what he's experienced. And so the story really is about this child and his maternal family. The shooting itself and the funeral is more or less just a vehicle to get them there. But what you see is this child interacting with his family, and you see the kind of the town coming together. You do see the town coming together in the wake of this tragedy as well. In the background, it's a theme that's shown throughout the story. But out of context, there's no reference to the shooting. There's no reference to that at all. You would simply read it as just someone coming home to a funeral, and really, again, it's about a child, his family, and kind of seeing a town that's a little bit different from what he's experienced before. Just saying this out loud right now, it would be very apparent that this is not a whole lot of controversy here. There's not going to be a whole lot of objection probably to the content of a story like this. The heart of the story, the heart and sort of the humanity of the story is not something you have to really sift through to find like you would in some of these other stories that I'm trying to get published. It's very right there, right in your face. And so with it, there's a certain directness to it. It's very safe. It's a very safe sort of content story. And because it's safe, I don't think it's a coincidence that that's the story right now that people are still looking at. Will it get rejected? Possibly. Probably. It could very well get rejected like the other ones here, and for whatever reason. But again, it seems that the content of my tales and what the subject matter is very much directly influenced by it. I don't think this is me, making excuse or anything like that. I think it's just a very honest assessment of what I wrote and where things are at. And I'm certainly happy with that. Like, I'm certainly fine with that. This is, as much as I might complain about it, I'd rather have written these stories because I believe in them that much and have them get rejected, whatever, and maybe have to, self-publish a short story collection at some point in a couple of years, which is kind of the game plan anyways, for this, and have everyone read them and experience them, and have it rejected by your magazine, than never to have written them at all, or have written them in a different way that got them accepted. I firmly believe that a lot of, I suppose, geniuses, I use the word genius, but it's not quite genius, but people that are very innovative, a lot of their stuff gets rejected very early on, and it sounds a little arrogant, I suppose, to think that I'm amongst that, but if you're going to do something that goes against the trend that stands out, that's awesome. That's great. And people will tell you, go against the trend, buck the trend. They'll tell you, go against, the grain in a sense. But when you do that, you're going to get rejected. As much as people clamor for it, they also want it. They don't really want it, not at first. It's very rare that people will accept new things very easily. So it's no different with this work. It's no different with my stories. If you're going to write something about a small town dealing with the wake of a mass shooting, especially with one of your stories being about the point of view of the parent of the mass shooter, that's going to be a little edgy. That's going to set some people off here a little bit here. Again, I approach it, I think, with a degree of heart, but that's going to set people off. It's just going to. And so, with it, I simply have to accept that. I have to kind of just take that in and accept that for what it is. And again, I'm not saying that I'm somehow some great genius or some like innovative individual or something like that. I'm not like some like the next Faulkner or anything like that. Though I wish I was, though I desire to be, as far as my prose goes. But yeah, I'm not some experimental artist here who's ahead of his time by any means. But what I wrote goes against probably what most people would do conventional. It's pretty risky subject. It's pretty touchy subject, especially in America. And that's not going to be the easiest thing to find a home for, unfortunately. But again, these stories, I think the story needs to be told. I think it needs to be told. I think it needs to be done. I think there's a lot of importance with it, and there's a lot of heart in this story that people are going to eventually find, I think. Yeah. It's funny, too. One of my writing buddies, he'd once said that a lot of my work reminds him of Dennis Johnson's work. I think he said something like, I write like Dennis Johnson, but with more depth or something like that to my characters, something like that. And I kind of agree with that. Like I tend to write a lot of the more messed up stuff, a lot of the stuff about characters that are in the margins of society and all that. That's the stuff I'm drawn to. This story is a little bit like that, but not so much with people that are like addicts on the margins or anything like that although that does play a factor a little bit. Drug use definitely is in desperation, small town desperation plays a factor in my tales. But this is more, can you approach tragedy? Can you approach a story that is so that has such darkness to it? Can you approach it? Can you find the humanity? Can you bring it forth, right? It's almost like I'm a defense attorney having to defend this sort of story, and it's kind of where I get the fun out of it, you know? Pick a subject that no one's ever going to want to deal with and ever want to read about, and then find the humanity in it, find the heart, and then bring it out. Do it. Take on that challenge. And that's typically how I viewed this, you know, in that same fashion. Take on the case that no one else wants to take and win it, you know? Find humanity in the darkness, and that's what my work's about, really, is humanity amongst the darkness.